Now, we're talking about a very interesting court case that's going on in the High Court at the moment, where two prisoners from America who are on death row are challenging the decision by the business secretary, Vince Cable, to allow the export of a drug called sodium thiopental, which is being used in lethal injections. Now, Vince Cable has granted an export licence, and it's caused a huge controversy because you would have thought maybe a Liberal Democrat would not have wanted to do this, because I don't know a single Liberal Democrat politician who's in favour of the death penalty. And in a way, this decision implicitly condones the death penalty, because it's quite clear that this drug is being used to inject prisoners on death row. For example, the state of Arizona carried out the execution of Jeffrey Landrigan on October the 25th this year. And to assure the public of the quality of the batch it used, the Attorney General of Arizona announced that it came from the United Kingdom, because we are the only country that's producing this drug at the moment. And Natalie Leven, the barrister who's representing the two American prisoners, she's from the firm Lee Day & Co., she said there's reason to think that California also obtained supplies from the UK recently. Now, there's all sorts of ethical dilemmas here. Imagine you were in Vince Cable's position yourself, and you were faced with this decision. Would you make the decision to allow the export of this drug to be used to inject prisoners on death row? Or would you stop it and actually damage a British company which is producing it? Well, he made the decision to allow it, but maybe you think that was the wrong decision. 0845 6060 973. Text me on 84850. Email Iain at lbc.co.uk or tweet me at lbc973. Now, let's talk to Sophie Walker. She's an investigator on the death penalty team at Reprieve. And just to explain what Reprieve is, it's a charity or pressure group that uses the law to enforce the human rights of prisoners from death row to Guantanamo Bay. Sophie, good evening.
Good evening. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, we're delighted to have you. Now, just take us through the basis of this legal case, because I think it's a fascinating case of where a politician is faced with a decision and he has to make it. There's no ducking out of it. Take us to where we got to today in court.
Right, so a couple of weeks ago, about 10 days ago, Reprieve wrote to, Reprieve through Lee Day, the solicitors on the case, wrote to Vince Cable, and we thought it would be a very sort of open and shut case. We wrote to him and said, we think British drugs are being used in the execution of US prisoners. Please, could you put an export order stopping drugs leaving the country for that purpose? And we were pretty shocked to get a letter back from Vince Cable's office saying that actually he wasn't going to put any such order in place. So today we judicially reviewed the decision at the High Court, and we got through the plaintiff's arguments today, and we started on the state's arguments this afternoon. They'll finish on Monday, and that was setting out exactly, why Vince Cable needs to act now to stop the drug from leaving Britain to travelling to the US for the use in executions. The British barrister explained the plaintiff explained how it broke the common law protection on the right to life, and how it broke the European Charter of Fundamental Freedoms. The state's lawyer will go on to explain on Monday why he thinks that isn't the case and why it is fine for the drug to leave the country with no restrictions on it.
Now, are we being fair to blame Vince Cable here, or is his name being used as the Secretary of State when maybe he didn't even know anything about it?
Well, he knew about it when we told him about it. So I don't think that this is absolutely happening in his name. The letter that he wrote back to us saying that he was deciding not to take any action had his name on it. But I do think it's fair to say that until we found out in an Arizona execution, the execution of a man called Landrigan, I don't think anyone knew that British drugs were being used in these executions. For a long time, the US pharmaceutical manufacturer Hospira has been making this drug, but it has recently stopped making the drug, and so they've had to look elsewhere, and there's been a shortage in the US. I'm pretty surprised that they turned to European drug manufacturers for their drug for this purpose, because Europe has for a long time taken a very strong anti-death penalty stance. So it is pretty shocking, both on the stance on the manufacturers and on the politicians, that no one so far has stood up to the plate to stop this from happening.
But the fact of the matter is, if we don't supply it, somebody else will eventually, won't they? And also, it's argued that it makes someone's death slightly more painless than it would have been otherwise.
Well, that's not quite true. I mean, first of all, they had the U.S. law is quite clear, and there has been many rounds of appeals on this. They have to use sodium thiopental for the first stage of the first drug and the 3-drug cocktail, which anaesthetize the person who's about to be executed. So that if there's no sodium thiopental, the execution can't happen. So it's not a matter of making it a more sort of an easier path, shall we say, for the poor person being executed. But on your second point, there are countries that are making other manufacturers and other countries are making these drugs. But that drug, those countries include China, and very recently there's been a lot of difficulties with Chinese drugs entering the US because the drugs haven't been made in the same form, and they've been the drugs have actually been faulty. So the US is very wary of getting its drugs from China at the moment, even, can you believe it, for execution purposes. So I think if we were to sort of turn the tap off from European manufacturing, making their way to the US, then I think it would be incredibly difficult for executions to continue, or at least to continue at the rates they are at the moment.
But it is also used as an anaesthetic in hospitals, isn't it? It's not just used for death penalty cases.
In the US, the vast majority of use is for death penalty. It's almost the drug has been replaced with another anaesthetic called propofol, which is a much more effective drug once you come out of the being anaesthetized.
Anaesthetized.
Oh, no. Anaesthetized. You can tell I'm not a scientist. I'm a lawyer. I'm getting tongue-tied already. How embarrassing. But it's much easier to sort of to come out of the what's been anaesthetized. So that's why propofol is used as opposed to sodium thiopental. In developing countries, the drug is still used quite regularly, but not in the US.
Just very quickly, who's actually paying for this judicial review case? Because it's not cheap to do this, is it? I mean, you're acting on behalf of 2 US prisoners here.
That's right. So they are indigent. They're indigent persons. They're not paying for it. Reprieve, we're a charity, so we're supported by a number of different means. I think the solicitors are getting legal aid for their work on the case, as they should be. They are challenging the UK government on their misapplication of UK and European law. So the
British taxpayer is funding 2 US prisoners on death row. Is that what you're telling me?
In short order, yes. But I think that's I think that's fine. I think that actually that's exactly if the British government aren't standing up to aren't standing up and aren't applying the British law and the European law, this is absolutely the sort of thing that we have to challenge.
But they're not British. They're not British citizens.
But it's the British law that's being broken. That's what matters here.
Well, yeah, but why should the British taxpayer pay for 2 US felons who've presumably killed people to take the British government to court? It's outrageous. Do you not think? Well, obviously you don't. Well,
I mean, I think in a nutshell.
Sophie, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Sorry, we got a very strange sound on the line there.
Oh no, I'm sorry. That didn't fade out. I was probably getting too enthusiastic.
Well,
I think the way of focusing on this issue is the British government isn't enforcing a law that's on the books in Britain against British manufacturers. It just so happens that if these drugs were left the country, they would lead to executions in the US. But actually, what the focus here is more on the UK government and their misapplication of UK law.
Okay, Sophie, thanks ever so much for joining us. That's Sophie Walker from the Reprieve organisation. She's an investigator on the death penalty team at Reprieve.